I just want to say I'm so thrilled to have the honor of facilitating today's conversation about the importance of board diversity and board representation from communities that are being served. Before we dive into this conversation, I'd like to provide a little bit of context, a little bit of background to frame what we're going to be talking about. First of all, I think we all recognize that we are living in a moment in which racial justice and equity are at the forefront of the national conversation in society, and increasingly at the forefront of conversations in boardrooms throughout the country. To achieve our goals of being a healthy and just sector, boards must ensure that they are centering equity and justice in serving their communities. And that cannot happen unless boards are diverse in their compositions, they're inclusive in their cultures, and they are equity focused in developing strategies and action plans that recognize the connection between equity and justice and boards' work and boards' missions. But according to our most recent Leading with Intent report at BoardSource, boards have a long way to go to achieve the diversity, equity, and inclusion objectives that I just mentioned. Our Leading with Intent data indicates that there's a disconnect between boards and the people and communities that they serve. As Dan mentioned just now, 29%, only 29% of board chairs reported that their board composition is truly representative of the demographic diversity of the community being served. Only about a third of boards place a high priority on knowledge of the community served when they recruit for board members. And an even smaller percentage, 28%, place a high priority on membership within the community served when they recruit for board members. We also know that the leadership of the nonprofit sector, as it stands today, is simply not diverse. Our BoardSource data indicates that 87% of nonprofit chief executives are white, 78% of nonprofit board members are white, 19%, almost 1 out of every 5 boards nationwide, 19% of boards do not include a single person of color. And not only are boards overwhelmingly white, but boards that are lacking in racial and ethnic diversity self-report that their board's racial and ethnic makeup negatively impacts their ability to understand the organization's operating environment and work, attract and retain talent for the board and staff, enhance the organization's standing with funders, donors, and the general public, understand how best to serve the community, and last but not least, to cultivate trust and confidence with the community served. So as you can see from these facts, the stakes are really very high when we talk about ways for boards to be prepared and positioned to be successful in bridging societal divisions and brokering solutions to the major societal challenges that we face. Boards simply must become more diverse, more inclusive, and equity focused, and they must become more willing to share power differently with members of the communities that they serve. These are some of the changes that must occur on our journey to becoming a healthier nonprofit sector. Now it is my pleasure to introduce to you 2 outstanding nonprofit leaders who will engage in this conversation with me and share their experiences in leading their organization's efforts to become more diverse and representative of the communities that they serve. First, I'd like to introduce Patricia Mota, who serves as the President and CEO for the Hispanic Alliance on Career Enhancement. She leads strategy, fundraising, and development, leadership programs, and expanding organizational reach on a national level. She's an innovative trailblazer who's recognized for her ongoing commitment to building inclusive and equitable workplaces and her resourcefulness and resilience in diversifying and creating culturally relevant and intentional environments that support the growth and development of Latinos in the workforce. Patricia's very strong history of serving the community is also reflected by her service on various nonprofit boards and committees. Welcome, Patricia. Nice to have you. And I'd also like to introduce Kimberly Corbin. Kimberly is the Chief Administrative and Financial Officer for the Greater Washington Urban League, and she also chairs the board of Maryland Nonprofits. Kimberly is an impassioned leader to whom organizations have repeatedly turned throughout her career to drive change for greater impact. Kimberly brings to the nonprofit sector an impressive record of accomplishments, particularly in areas such as organizational development and growth. And she, like Patricia, has exhibited a relentless commitment to equity and the empowerment of historically vulnerable and diverse populations. Welcome to you both. It's wonderful to be with you today.
So glad. Thank you.
I'd like to start off our conversation by having each of you just tell us about how these issues we're talking about today, board diversity and centering equity in service to communities, how each of these issues relates to your work at the Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement and at the Greater Washington Urban League. Patricia, let's start with you.
Sure, and thank you for the invitation to be here. It's good to be with each of you and engage in this very, excuse me, critical conversation, right, for so many reasons. I have the honor of serving as president and CEO in this role. I've been with the organization since 2010, at the time joining as a programs director, evolving to leading our fundraising and development, and now 6 years as president and CEO. The mission of our organization since 1982 continues to be the mission that we uphold today. And as you may imagine, our leaders here joining us today may imagine how we deliver on that has constantly evolved over time. And that mission being to positively impact workplaces by cultivating the pipeline of Latino talent, providing Latinos the insight, access, and development to be successful in their careers. One of the things that I'm really proud of being an organization that's national in scope is that while we are Latino serving, we are not Latino exclusive. I think that's important to me in terms of understanding that our programs, our services, and our events are open to everyone, but our mission is critical when you look at the representation and the numbers across the country, right? And so it helps us build awareness, and we carry out our mission through 3 core areas. One is through talent acquisition programs and services where we're actively connecting whether it's employer partners, whether it's those looking for leaders to serve on boards, to talent, anywhere from intern entry level to even senior and executive level talent across the country. And so one thing I never want to hear from our employer partners, any boards that we're working with, is that the talent does not exist, because it does, right? The second area of work, which is critical, right, for all of us, is the pipeline and leadership development. These are cohort model programs that start as young as the high school level, our El Futuro program, university, young professionals, Mujeres de Hacer, women's leadership, emerging leaders, anywhere 10-week, 14-week, year-long cohort-based programs that we provide individual leadership assessments, individual coaching, culturally relevant content, but most importantly, a strong multi-generational support network across the country where we have executives and folks more senior in their careers coming in as subject matter experts, as mentors, as speakers to those getting started, and to those in their careers doing the same for our students. And the third and the final area I would say is through thought leadership. We just had a Chief Diversity Officer roundtable featuring leaders across the country sharing best practices with one another. We have an executives leadership tour. And so it is through these various programs and events that we're hosting throughout the year that it helps us serve our mission ensuring that we're connecting to talent, but to the topic that we're speaking of today, is ensuring that partners and organizations across the country understand that through our organization, you can have access to diverse talent, to Latino talent that are willing to serve as board members for organizations as well.
Wonderful, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Kimberly, over to you.
Sure, thank you. And it's so good to join you and Tricia on this call. Let me just say, as it relates to the Greater Washington Urban League, equity has always and remains our mission. Seeing Blacks able to thrive unimpeded and unharmed by structural racism is our vision, right? The root causes of our lived experiences are at the center of our program design. Let me say that again. The root causes and lived experience of our constituents are at the center of our program designs. It also means that the other thing that we really have been intentional about over the last couple of years is focusing in on life transformation instead of situational improvement. That demands that we prioritize human capital development and not skill development. As I always say, folks is pretty smart. What they need is therapy to address the trauma and the lived experience of hitting themselves up against barrier after barrier after barrier, experiencing institutional betrayal after institutional betrayal. If you cannot get folks past that point, past the trauma, it doesn't matter the skill set that you give them. So we focus on human capital development. We add to it the skills. And we do that in, like Tricia said, we play multiple roles. We're advocates all day long. From powering up the vote to standing up for disparity study to ensure that Black-owned small businesses are included in government contracts. We distribute assistance. That is probably one of the things that we're most known for. These days we're distributing upwards of $20 million of cash every year in partnership with the district agencies. And we power up our constituent capacity. That is where we talk about that building human capital, but we do it so they have the capacity and so they have the resilience to navigate in, around, and through the structural barriers, right? Then we do the last thing, and that is we always bring the voice of the community no matter where we go. Our CEO is asked all the time to give testimony in front of the council. All of our leaders, our senior leaders, are on some type of working group about making change in the community, or we're all part of collaborations around the DMV. And so each time we participate in one of those groups as part of this overall movement of systems change, we bring the voice of the people we serve.
Wonderful. Clearly, both of you are so deeply engaged in this work, and it's wonderful to hear the efforts and the initiatives and the progress you've each made in your organizations. Kimberly, I'm going to stay with you for a moment and turn our attention to your role as chair of the board of Maryland Nonprofits, and would love to hear more about how the organization, how Maryland Nonprofits has worked and is working to ensure that the board is more representative of the communities that the organization serves.
Yeah, so let me just give a couple things. One is representation is essential, but it is not the only thing. It is structural racism, right, impacts everybody. Even the oppressed can be unwilling, participants in the promotion and the protection of structural racialization, right? So we have to be very careful about just putting a Black person, a Hispanic person, a Native American, an Asian person on your board does not give you what you need alone in of itself. But I'll go back to kind of what James Baldwin always says, nothing can be changed if you don't face it. Mm-hmm. So you still have to put somebody on there that has the lived experience. So one of the things, so when it comes to Maryland Nonprofits, first and foremost, what the leadership at Maryland Nonprofits did was, and the board supported it, was make equity and quality of life its North Star. That's its vision. That's our North Star on everything that we do. Is it going to lead to equity and a quality of life for everybody? So having said that, as a board, there are a few things that we've done. One, we have re-examined our board demographics, and we have this big old matrix now that we look at that drives our recruiting. It's aspirational, but it is looking to balance diversity, to ensure balance and diversity of thought across sex, gender, race, expertise, leadership role, heritage, if because you got to add that in there, because race is a political construct. It's not where I'm from. So we have that matrix, and we look at that matrix when we're thinking about who should we fill in. Two, we're participating in the staff and the board participate in intense anti-racist training, right? You can't leave what you don't know. You just can't. Okay. Board meetings are also, this year, I've made it such that the board meetings incorporate two things as a standing part of our meeting. One is an exercise of inclusion. And we do different exercises every single board meeting. But it is to make sure that everybody feels included, everybody feels safe to say what they're feeling, one way or the other, negative, positive. We create a safe space. We learn to each other. We become trusted partners with each other so we can have the difficult conversations. Then we make sure that we dedicate time. We have dedicated meetings, 2-hour meetings, just around equity and inclusion and justice, right? Part of that is around, the quality of life, answering the question for ourselves. What does equity and quality of life demand of the board and the organization? And we grapple with that. The other thing is that we made our DEI, and now it's DEIJ. I don't like the Jedi because I don't think there's anything magical about having to do this work. It's just hard work. But DEI and Justice Committee was made a permanent committee, a standing committee. And then we infuse the activities, or we make space for those we serve on the boards. We have specifically asked leadership to, bring stories of lived experience for the folks that we serve and or folks that work for us. And we have backed our CEO to be bold, to go to really take on equity as a North Star for this organization.
Great, thank you. Patricia, over to you. I would love to hear more about the work you were doing with your board at Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement. And also wanted to touch on another issue that relates to your organization. It's my understanding that your focus this year is around the intersection of identity, equity, and unity as sort of the theme of your organization this year. I'd love to hear more about that in terms of how you arrived at that theme and how you would advise other organizations to move from sort of intent to implementation in that space.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great question. And Kim shared a lot of great nuggets in terms of the work that's being done at her organization, specifically with this theme. I mean, every year we like to shine light on a specific theme, and it aligns with all the programming, events, and things that we're doing throughout the year. And for us, I mean, it started about a couple of years ago where we really started talking a lot more about intersectionality. And as it pertains to what the U.S. Hispanic, Latino, Latinx cohort represents, we're looking at 27 countries of origin, some first, second, third, fourth, fifth generation here. 25% of our U.S. Hispanic Latinx identify as Afro-Latinos, right? And then we look at deeper in terms of just the diversity within the U.S. Hispanic Latino cohort, and how critical that identity is for not only this community to share, but all communities, so that as you're in spaces, it empowers others, right? And so I think when we talk about we lead at identity, at the intersection of identity, equity, and unity, in this kind of lens, it's encouraging leaders to reflect on and sharing their own stories, as Kim mentioned, in terms of their own journeys, their own challenges, but also because we never know the intersection of identities that we each share, right? And that's one way to go about it. In terms of the call to action with that areas, we ask not only leaders to share, but individuals to really take time to reflect on what that means for them. For me, it's critical that in spaces I'm sharing, I identify as Latina, I am the daughter of Mexican immigrants, I am Mexican American, I am first generation college student, first generation, nonprofit executive. And for me, those are parts of my identity that are critical to share because I never know who's in the room. And we want to make sure that those that can identify with any piece of that, I can empower in that lens. The equity piece is for individuals is to be able to look at opportunities that serve them where they're at, right? Kim talking about the way the programs are being developed. I talk about at ASE, it's culturally relevant because we're meeting individuals, we're putting them in spaces where they can share similar experiences with others. And I think sometimes dominant spaces, or I would say whether it's a traditional white male structure that has been built, may not understand how empowering that is to have a group of individuals come together through a cohort, through a program, and really have those aha moments. I never realized as I got into professional spaces why I wasn't comfortable speaking up. But in my culture, we grew up right in a household, Latinas, it's calladita más bonita. The quieter you are, the more beautiful you are. Don't speak unless spoken to, which a lot of other cultures can identify with as well, right? But it's sometimes having those candid conversations that are empowering for groups. And so as an organization, as leaders, is how are we providing those types of spaces to cultivate future pipeline of board members or board leaders within our organizations. And the unity piece is also speaking about allyship, right? Is how are we ourselves taking it upon ourselves to have courageous conversations, to ask questions, but also take moments of these tough conversations as moments of education, right? I think as I was reflecting on how we came together as a country this past weekend, 20 years ago, right, with 9/11, I only wished, right, that we were at that point with this pandemic and with everything coming together and united, right, as we did 20 years ago to really get to the other side of this pandemic, but most importantly, to move the needle towards racial equity and justice, for all. And so on that piece is encouraging learning and encouraging conversations, and these tough conversations at the board level need to be had, right? Is saying, looking at our demographics, and not just when it comes to race and ethnicity and gender, but all the layers that make us who we are, to ensure that it aligns with the population and the communities that we serve. And then Jim, to your point earlier, right, to the staff, right now we're also facing a war on talent. And it's imperative more than ever that board leaders are taking this as a critical reflection, but also to take action because our talent is moving fairly fast, and especially Gen Z, those that are starting in the workforce and coming in, they have totally different expectations in terms of what they expect from their employers. And so it's really upon our board leaders and CEOs and executives to take action.
Thank you. Thank you both for your comments in that space. That there's so much richness in what you both just shared. And I think a lot of what you just shared relates to my next question, which speaks to somewhat to the lack of empowerment that's happening right now as it relates to the lack of diversity on boards. And so I shared some data earlier about how the leadership of the sector is not particularly diverse right now. We see 78% of board members are white, a fifth of boards don't have any people of color on them. And so we just know that the sector's leadership is not representative of the largely BIPOC communities that the sector serves. And so I would love to ask both of you for your insights on what would you suggest the nonprofit sector's leadership should do differently to become more diverse and representative of the communities that it serves?
So I'm going to go through my 5 pieces. I'm going to go through them quickly so that Tricia has I know she has such rich things to share. First and foremost, you have to develop a truth-telling advisory team. You cannot do this work, which is hard work, which is emotional work, unless you are willing, unless you have a group of folks who are willing to tell you the truth about yourself, about your organization, about the how your organization is viewed in the community. Second, you got to commit to engaging in those uncomfortable conversations with humility and respect. Again, I quote James Baldwin, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. You must be commit to having the conversation. 3, you got to do the training. And you got to ask yourself, what do you have the responsibility to learn so that you can lead and be successful? Equity in the Center, Racial Equity Institute, Common Health Action, Institute for Survival and Beyond, Org Forward. These are all consultants that have been doing this work for decades. You don't have to go it alone. Hire one of them. They will be happy to help you get to another space. 4th, you got to work to develop your data dictionary. You cannot allow language to become a barrier and a source of emotional drama in your conversations. For instance, you got to understand the concept of race. White people aren't white. It's a concept. It's a social political concept. You are your heritage, not your race. And again, just knowing what racism is and what it's not, right? My last thing. Take you out of the discussion. Don't look to exempt yourself from the discomfort of knowing the truth. Our collective success is not an individual issue. It's about the movement to address the systemic policies, practices, behaviors, laws, and the like that were originally set up to empower and promote white supremacy, Black inferiority, and Native annihilation. They were not meant for us to survive, and they darn sure weren't meant for Mexican Americans to come back and be a large portion of this community, but we did. So take you out of the discussion. We aren't here to call you racist. We are here to examine the policies, practices. And oh, by the way, another thing that happens is the rhetoric and the disinformation that is causing Americans and other folks, European, to sanitize history and erase history. That rhetoric in and of itself affects everybody's viewpoint towards each other. Okay, tag.
Thanks, Kimberly. Patricia, on your side, what would you suggest in terms of what boards can do differently to be more representative of the communities that they serve?
Yeah, I think just to add to everything that Kim mentioned, right? One is there's first got to be that commitment from the CEO and the chair, and I think that is just super critical to ensure that their intent to do so and full support is there. And I know it's easier said than done, and but that is super critical. The other key thing that we've done for our organization and are helping other organizations do the same is building the pipeline from those that have benefited from our programs and services to serve, whether it's a
I believe we've lost volume.
Yep, Jim, can you hear me?
Oh, Kimberly, I hear you. Patricia, can you say something?
Yeah, we lost your volume, Patricia.
No. Let's see, not hearing Patricia. Why don't we do this? Patricia, we're going to work on, I think we're going to work on your volume. I'm going to, Kimberly, I'm going to come back over to you just for a moment while we work out Patricia's mic issues. Kimberly, based on your experience working with boards, both at the Greater Washington Urban League and other and Maryland nonprofits, can you speak to the benefits of a board being more representative of the community being served, and how have you seen those benefits help the organization improve its impact from where it was before it really focused on this diversity, and how it improved by becoming more diverse, more inclusive, more equity focused?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, representation is not enough. Without a commitment to uncover and lead in truth, only small incremental change is possible. So on the other hand, I can say that a dedication to countering the sanitization and erasure of history enlightens everyone. And when you become enlightened, the pathway to generational impact and life transformation becomes clear. The light bulbs go on. The connectedness to the mission, to the movement happens when you do this work. As it relates to kind of how, the benefits to an organization, remember that trust is what helps or what allows you to drive impact, right? But you can't get trust out of betrayal. It doesn't happen that way. You have to trust, and comes from the authenticity. And remember, authenticity is not just because you say you want to do something. It's because we see you doing the work so that you can do it well, right? If you don't learn what you need to learn, if you're not inclusive of the voice of the people, not truly inclusive of the people that you want to serve, if you're not leading with their lived experience at the center of what you do instead of what you think you can do, right? Then, you can't gain that level of authenticity. But that authenticity, once you have it and once you're committed to it and you've got your culture that is surrounding it, that trust builds. Now you've got a whole cadre of volunteer ambassadors. They're out there singing your praises, bringing you opportunities all day long. That then really centers on and helps you to center on that lived experience and root causes, and leads to an effectiveness that you would not otherwise have. Let me give you, for instance, and I think I alluded to it before. You look at small business, Black-owned small businesses. We know there's a huge equity gap, especially in the DMV, right? Between, the opportunities that other businesses get that small Black-owned businesses don't get, right? Well, we put, when we're putting those lived experiences in the center of what we're doing, we are now deciding that sitting here and doing SCORE and SBA is great, but we have been doing SCORE and SBA for decades. And yet there's been no change in the equity. So you got to start being creative, but you have to start with the root cause. So root cause, effective solution to the root cause. So we realize that, yeah, we can sit here and talk about matching up capital, but we're finding that a lot of the challenge with our small businesses are their competence, not their competence, but their competence. So we are working on, with our small businesses, of being mindful of addressing the trauma. So we actually started doing financial therapy with all of our folks, whether they're coming for a house, whether they're coming for a business. We start with therapy, really helping folks to deal with the emotional traumas that stand in their way of feeling confident. We also address the history, the what's been erased. Blacks have been entrepreneurs since we were enslaved and even before, because there were free Africans here before slaves. They were entrepreneurs too. So when you give somebody that history and they are able to connect themselves in a way with that pride, guess what? They're not thinking fear, they're thinking achievement. So that is one of the ways in which having folks on your board share those lived experiences allows you to be more effective in designing your impact. And guess what? The bottom line is we get more money for serving Black people authentically than other organizations get by just doing activity with us. We've been around 83 years, about to be 84 years. The longevity matters. And that's because we authentically serve Black issues with eye on root causes and lived experiences. And we just got a $60 million contract.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Which quadruples our size.
Definitely hearing the themes of authenticity and genuineness in the work that you all have done, are doing today and have done historically. As we turn back to Patricia, before we go back to you, Patricia, I just want to, just a note to the audience, we're about to open this up for audience questions. So please feel free to input your questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. But before we go to that, Patricia, welcome back.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly, yes. And wanted to come back to you with a question around the work you're doing to help place Latinx individuals into board level positions. I'd love to hear more about some of the persistent barriers you may have faced in that work and how you have overcome them. So I'll hand it over to you for that.
Yeah, and kudos, Kimberly, to your organization for that. That's a tremendous impact to be awarded, and does speak volumes to the work that your organization has done. I do want to say one thing from my comment earlier. I don't know if it was heard or not, but one thing that's worked really well in terms of building the pipeline of future board members is building auxiliary boards, volunteer boards. Our current National Board of Director treasurer served on our first ever Young Professionals Board years ago, and now serving in that capacity. And I think we're helping other organizations build those types of auxiliary board structures or young professional boards to be able to build that. And especially those that have benefited from your programs, your services are such a great talent pool to be able to build that future pipeline of talent. In terms of some of the challenges, I would say, you know, to Kim's point, it's how we all have bias, right? And I think it's some bit that's been some of the challenge in terms of where we're hearing back, oh, it just wasn't a fit, and taking a deeper dive and saying why and really getting that sense of understanding, and throwing it back, and I guess having the conversation in terms of what are the challenges, and sharing back with them in terms of what are the qualifications, and really focusing in on that, and which is why it's so critical to have a nominations committee or a DEI committee, or a committee that's really focused on ensuring that those board members that are coming in, potential candidates, can support, right, in terms of that. But I wouldn't say, you know, I think that the talent is there. It's having, again, that support from the CEO level, the chairperson, from the National Board of Directors that are truly committed. I recently joined a board of directors, a board of trustees, in higher education, and the chairperson, we share a similar alma mater. He went back to his alma mater in terms of a graduate school in public administration. Never had a relationship, but you know, one of the goals that this chair had for this board was to ensure that they were bringing in people of color, diverse, BIPOC, that align with the mission that this institution serves to fulfill. And so there's alignment there, and I would say I'm one of two of Hispanic Latinx background on this board of trustees, I should say. But it took an intentional effort from this chairperson to reach out and to have the conversation. And it wasn't just with myself, there were several others that he connected with, right? To be able to ensure that there's an understanding and that there's access to talent. And so I think that the number one thing I would say, just from my perspective, is just the comfort level, which when you peel the onion deeper, has to do with bias and just the folks that are currently serving on the board.
Absolutely. Thank you, Patricia. I'm going to open it up now to questions from our audience. And I see one question in the chat box right now that I want to share with both of you. And the question is this: as the board chair of the Center for Election Science, I know the importance of having diversity on our board. Unfortunately, I don't feel like I have access to communities where I can find diverse board members. Where can I recruit without feeling like I'm infiltrating? Who would like to go first on this one?
I'll let Patricia go first.
Well, I know, Kim, you had a list of organizations that you shared earlier, and I think those are all great resources. I would say both of our organizations are great resources. I think the access of talent that both of our organizations have, I never feel like anybody's infiltrated. If they're saying, hey, do you have any board members to recommend? I just sent a couple to another organization that I'm working with this morning. And so I think it's part of my own personal mission, but also my responsibility in the role that I serve, to ensure that organizations are connecting to potential board members and bringing them on board.
So let me just kind of, I'm going to go at it from just a like groups of folks that you guys could consider. There are a tremendous number of Black professional organizations: National Black MBA, National Association of Black Accountants, National Association of Black Journalists. They all, are meant to, have a community of folks that are, well able to serve on boards. And so, for instance, if you're looking for somebody on the treasury side, on the finance side, send an email to the national officer at the National Black MBA, National Association of Black Accountants. So the Black professional groups are a good place, treasure trove. The other places are the civil rights organizations. Remember, we are national organizations with multiple affiliates. The Urban League is a national organization with 90 affiliates across the country. We have a young professionals auxiliary. We have a guild, which is, the over 40, and experienced folks. Making the ask is fine. Never feel like, I'm with you, Patricia, never feel like asking, hey, do you have somebody who would be good at serving on a board? I would also say that there are other organizations, I don't have a list in my head, but I do know, but that, for instance, BoardSource is a good source to find, recommendations or channels by which to find, diverse candidates. But United Way has a training program, right? And in fact, LinkedIn is beginning to do more work in helping folks identify folks. So, if you go, not just a job, but now people are posting board positions in LinkedIn.
Great points from both of you on that question. I appreciate it. I want to pose one to both of you as well. It's a scenario that I see a lot in the work that I do as I go out and talk to boards about becoming more diverse. And very often when I talk to boards, the board members who I talk to are very much interested and energized around becoming more diverse. But very often those same board members will say, yeah, but there's somebody on my board right now who I just don't think is that enthused about this work we're doing around equity or around becoming more diverse. They've been on the board for a long time. It's typically a white board member, and they just don't know. They're wondering how they can continue to make progress if they have board members such as this white board member I'm sort of referencing here, how do they continue to make progress when not everybody is on the same page? And so I wonder if you all could share some insights around any personal experiences you've had in those scenarios where you've encountered board members who just aren't quite as enthused about this work as some others would be.
Well, whether it's something like that or any other major change or decision that I've had to, push forward, and it's lobbying, so to speak. It's me having one-on-ones and bringing them to see from different perspectives. But sometimes, I think it's if you have the majority on board, and there's board terms also for a reason, right? I think it's also ensuring that, and those are being practiced, and that you're ensuring that as you're bringing people on board, that they do share that value, right? As you're transitioning new board members. So it may not be something that could happen maybe sooner, but maybe down the line, by ensuring that you're putting the right people or bringing the right people on board to support that.
Yeah, and we even I won't talk about my specific board because that would be violating somebody's privacy. But yes, we have board meetings that are optional in between our formal board meetings, and those board meetings are dedicated solely to equity and the work that we have to do. And in our last conversation, we were talking about the work that we're doing to incorporate a couple of new entities, one focused on Black leadership in nonprofit. We already have Latinos Unidos, Maryland Latinos Unidos, who is the Latinx group that we merged. But we were having the discussion that said that goes like this: you cannot take a Latinos Unidos or Black ED network and put it inside of a white dominant culture and think it's going to be successful. That's not how that works, right? And we've seen it over and over again. Affirmative action, AA certification for small business. We can go down the list. These tools were meant to atone for the damage that we did to the enslaved Africans and to make up for it, just like we did with the Japanese internment, right? They don't work because we put them inside of a white dominant political construct, which corrupted it, and it didn't work. So we were talking about white dominant culture and white supremacy. He spoke out and said, I'm very uncomfortable with this, and so forth and so on. So on one hand, you have to make space. And I felt really, really good about what he said and that he spoke up. That meant that we made the space comfortable enough for him to speak his truth. So that's the first thing. You got to make it comfortable for everybody to speak their truth, right? But you then you can tackle that with knowledge, right? What is it that he has to learn so that he can understand that white dominant culture and race are the same? We're connected, and is what we're actually fighting against, right? And that we're not trying to call any one person racist, right? So we are continuing on with this learning and learning and learning, and we're building our dictionary together. So as he becomes more enlightened, he gets more and more comfortable speaking, and we get to address his emotion, but with respect and humility, right? The other thing is, I don't ever manage those board meetings. I always bring in a professional facilitator to do that. You can't do it member to member. You have to have a professional person who knows how to deal with, people's transition, because there's a long road and there's a lot of steps in between, and everybody's not on the same way. So find yourself a professional facilitator to facilitate the learning. They'll get there.
Well, before I hand it back over to Dan, I want to thank you both for the insights and perspectives and the lived experiences you've shared with us today. There's so much that you've shared. The three things I come away with, among many, would be that we have to be able to have to be courageous and have courageous conversations, get over any sort of defensiveness that might come with these conversations, any sorts of discomfort that comes with them. We have to keep learning. We have to continue to be curious and learn about our history and how it impacts where we are in 2021, and to, again, not to be defensive about what history shows, and then to just be committed and to recognize that this is not going to be linear in terms of the progress that organizations might make. There are going to be some stops and starts. There's going to be, sometimes you'll take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but it's about being persistent and in terms of continuing to center this work. And both of you are such wonderful examples of leaders who are clearly doing that.